Welcome to Alaska Weather, a production of Alaska Public Media and the National Weather Service, Alaska Region. Produced and broadcast daily from the studios of KAKM, Alaska Weather provides complete forecasts, public, marine, and aviation for all of Alaska. Alaska Weather is made possible by the following sponsors.
It's never too early to set expectations and goals for your child's education. The UA College Savings Plan provides opportunities that can help you reach your educational savings goals. Save in Alaska. Study anywhere. There is more information available by calling 1-888, the number 4, and then Alaska. This message sponsored by the UA College Savings Plan.
If subsistence hunting, trapping, and fishing are important to you, please consider applying for one of the open seats on your Federal Subsistence Regional Advisory Council. These seats will be filled by rural Alaskans who are knowledgeable about fish and wildlife subsistence in their region. Apply by Friday, January 29th, 2016. Information at 1-800-478-1456 or email subsistence@fws.gov.
The National Weather Service.
And good Wednesday, everyone. I'm meteorologist Dave Snider with the National Weather Service. It's the 2nd of December now, and as always, we encourage you to stay up to date with your local weather information. You can always do that a million different ways. Some of those pretty easy to do. If you're close to town, weather.gov/Alaska, you can get that on your cell phone data plan fairly easily. The weather info line might be a better choice if you're out in the bush. 800-472-0391. During the day on Facebook, on Twitter, and on YouTube, you'll find information from all three of your National Weather Service forecast offices on Twitter. NWS Alaska, NWS Juneau, NWS Anchorage, and NWS Fairbanks can be found there, as well as anywhere on the hashtag AKwx if you'd like to share a picture of your beautiful shot out the window there as snow is falling, or perhaps the aurora. Tag us with that and we'll know that you're talking about Alaska weather. It's a great way to share weather information no matter what part of Alaska you're in. And on YouTube, NWS Alaska, look for AKwx TV. That's the shortened version of what you'll see here during the entire Alaska Weather Show. Of course, in the afternoon, you'll get your daily afternoon map briefing from the NWS Anchorage account as well. So a lot of different ways to get your information, as well as NOAA Weather Radio and Marine VHF. Speaking of Marines, look out at the central and western part of the chain, a pretty healthy spiral there in the atmosphere. That low pressure system is strengthening to about 956 millibars. As the number drops lower, the winds should pick up, and we are seeing that in some cases. However, the central and western part of the chain are only under gale warnings at this point. So right now, no observations or expectations that these winds are really going to come up in a huge or substantial way at this point. So perhaps getting a little bit of the easy side of the storm for now. The frontal boundary is working eastward, as you can see, and as that approaches Unalaska and Dutch Harbor, Nikolsky will probably have a better chance for some rain to mix in with snow in the next 24 hours, and winds will pick up a little bit more as they come over the Alaska Peninsula. In the meantime, warmer air is lifting northward, and that is going to change the wind direction a little bit more across the south and westerly coast. You'll see that in just a little bit. We're also watching the system across the eastern and central sections of the Gulf. You can see that very tight spiraling pattern there. This one's moving a little bit more to the north and northwest, and with that front quickly moving to the north and northwest through the northern parts of southeast, you'll probably see a break in the rainfall across some of the southern sections of the Panhandle as we go through the remainder of tonight. This will continue to bring rainfall through parts of the Panhandle over several waves. You can see there's more moisture. It's not quite as organized as the way it looked yesterday. And many in south central and Kodiak Island and southwest are kind of in the drier doldrums between these two systems here, a weak area of high pressure in between. But riding over this are several waves of low pressure, each one of these rotating from east to west underneath a much larger low pressure system in the upper atmosphere. And you can see that when we look at the jet stream pattern and at the 9,000 and 3,000 foot winds as well. So the winds are considerably stronger out in the west than what we're seeing here across the east, but the eastern storm has tapped into enough warm and unstable air that we're actually seeing some thunder and lightning with this, as we've seen today. In fact, our friends at the Juneau National Weather Service office shared some of that on Twitter. So if you haven't been on Twitter, it's a great way to get information that you can scale down to your part of Alaska. So if you're in Southeast, you can follow them, and anytime they say something, you can get a free alert on your phone that'll tell you that they're talking about weather in southeastern Alaska. And today they actually shared an animation that had some of the lightning strikes there offshore. So if you want to check that out, do that after the show or perhaps a little bit later on after dinner. The 970 millibar low will continue slowly drifting northward, and it's going to start to fill in. That frontal boundary that was draped over southeast is going to fall apart pretty quickly. And as it does so, all of this air starts to mix up a whole lot more. So we don't have a big surge of warm or cold air anymore. It's all just kind of getting stirred up, kind of like the pumpkins, around Thanksgiving time. Of course, we're moving toward Christmas, so whatever you like to stir up around Christmas, gingerbread perhaps. That across southeast, you can see light rainfall there, still expected as we head through tonight, on and off, moving into Prince William Sound and parts of South Central. There may be some snow showers lingering in the areas around the Chugach and around Cook Inlet as we head into tomorrow. One of those pieces of low pressure will swing up toward Prince William Sound at 987 millibars. We're still going to have our resident low pressure system here across the eastern Gulf at 980 millibars. And again, don't have that huge surge of rainfall moving up. It should be a little bit more sporadic with time. Out across the central and upper Yukon and the central interior, expect some light snow. Some of that could pass through the Fairbanks region as one more wave moves from east to west. Up north, a wind pattern will still keep things a little bit on the blustery side around the Brooks Range, and the Arctic coast will be under high pressure and probably looking at some ice fog in areas. With that, we would expect a poor visibility and probably some pretty serious cold. Temperatures tonight will be well below zero. And around St. Lawrence Island, look for pockets of light snow there. Some of that could extend southward in scattered snow shower fashion as you head toward the Aleutians, with waves of low pressure there across the central and western chain. That will start to work eastward. You'll notice you see these little buckling lines here. This is high pressure trying to hold on to the south and western part of the state and into the Gulf. Not doing such a hot job, but it is providing a little bit of dry air and a little bit of a break from the precipitation across south central and southwestern regions, as well as Kodiak Island, until Friday, when that breaks down. And you can see that low pressure here across the central Gulf has now taken over most of the weather picture. At 965 millibars, pockets of rain showers should be expected. You'll also see a few areas of light rain across southeast, snow showers across more inland locations, including the Kenai Peninsula, parts of the Anchorage Bowl, and maybe as far north as the Talkeetnas. And then once you get across the Alaska Range, there's still an opportunity for some light snow around the upper Yukon and up toward Eagle and Arctic Village and east toward Old Crow. Blowing snow still going to be an issue across the Brooks Range, and across the Arctic coast, expect some cold weather. Not a whole lot of precipitation expected there, more wind than anything else. And from St. Lawrence Island southward toward the Pribilofs, areas of light snow, snow showers, and then rain mixed with snow as you head toward the eastern chain. Snow showers a little bit more likely for the central and western chain, and you get a hint of what's to come. Just in the very far corner of your screen, you can see the next weather boundary trying to lift northward out of the North Pacific and eastern Asia. That too will be a stronger storm that we'll keep a watch on as we head into the weekend. In the meantime, the temperatures today were in the 30s and 40s for southeast. Meanwhile, Yukon saw temperatures in the teens and 20s. Haines and Skagway made it almost to 40 degrees, mid-40s around Sitka, about the same as you head toward Ketchikan, Craig, Klawock, and into the Dixon entrance region. Juneau was close to 40, as I said. 37 in Yakutat, 30s to about 40 degrees for Prince William Sound. Cordova saw 40 today, 23 in Anchorage, 28 in Homer, 18 in Talkeetna. And as you get up toward Fairbanks, it was about 10 today. Healy was 5, Fort Greely 7, about the same there in Eagle, 3 around Fort Yukon, and then into the Brooks Range, and temperatures took a nosedive to about 15 to 20 below, all the way through the coastal plain. Atkasuk was 20 below, 11 below around Barrow, 18 below for Prudhoe Bay, and temperatures got above zero in Kotzebue Sound today. Kivalina was 4, Kotzebue 3, Shishmaref 9, Nome saw 18, Galena, pretty cold stuff today at 18 below. It was also a pretty cold day for Tanana, it looks like, almost 20 below. 3 above in Grayling, 7 above in McGrath after a cold day yesterday, 8 above in Bethel, and teens and 20s out toward Lake Iliamna and west. For the Bristol Bay region, teens, the Alaska Peninsula in the 30s, 36 in Dutch Harbor and Unalaska, 26 in St. Paul, and mid-30s for the central and western chain. Overnight lows, again, will be pretty cold across the North Slope with many areas anywhere from 15 to 20 below. 3 below in Fort Yukon, 9 below in Fairbanks, teens to low 20s for South Central and Prince William Sound, a little bit closer to the 30s and 40s for Southeast, 32 in Kodiak, 30s for most of the Alaska Peninsula. The YK Delta, including Bethel and Newtok and areas out around Monarch, probably closer to 0, maybe even a little bit colder than that inland. 2 above in Nome and 0 for Shishmaref. High temps tomorrow, back to 3 above for Shishmaref, about 10 below in Barrow, 4 above in Fairbanks, 5 above in Eagle, South Central in the upper 20s to lower 30s as you head out towards Seward and Homer, 30s and 40s for most of Southeast, 36 in Kodiak, and closer to 40 around Sand Point, Cold Bay, and Falls Pass, about 40 degrees in Dutch Harbor and Unalaska. Expect IFR conditions across the North Slope tomorrow. Again, most of that is just blowing snow, not precipitation. Look for MBFR just offshore of most of the YK Delta, and IFR conditions across Sand Point, Falls Pass, and Cold Bay. And just to the west of that, you'll see slightly improved conditions there. Look for MBFR through most of the Bering Sea. And Aktuvik Pass and Adigan Pass, we expect to see MBFR conditions there. For Lake Clark and Merrill Pass, expect VFR through most of the day. Looks like Rainy Pass should hold at MVFR. Windy Pass expected to turn over to VFR conditions after a lower visibility start. Isabel Pass also looking for MVFR conditions through your Thursday. Mentasta Pass right now looks to be visual through most of the day. Tanita Pass we expect to see MVFR heading for VFR conditions, and Portage Pass looks to be VFR by the end of the day. Improvements there, and Chilkoot and White Pass will likely hold at MVFR. Freezing levels show that the warm air aloft across the eastern Gulf really isn't going anywhere, but it's also not spreading out a whole lot more than it was yesterday. A 2,000-foot freezing line covering up some of the inner coastal waterways there, and a surface freezing line right along the Gulf Coast, dropping through Shelikof Strait and holding very close to Bristol Bay. And of course, most of Alaska remains sub-freezing in the morning. Icing potential is pretty hit and miss. Most areas are seeing a little bit of moisture that could produce some isolated moderate around the Pribilovs to the Alaska Peninsula and westward toward Kiska, almost Attu, and around the Bering Strait below 9,000 feet, also around the interior, as well as areas in the Cook Inlet region and the Parks Highway and west toward the Alaska Range above 3,000 feet there, and hit and miss across the southern parts of southeast and offshore above 6,000 feet. The jet stream shows a fairly broad area now of low pressure coming out of the Pacific and south of Alaska. With that, that's allowed colder air to settle in. Each one of these waves of low pressure stirs up a surface weather system, but the main superhighway of weather is generally south of Alaska and guiding that into the Pacific Northwest. Some of our weather systems are making their way up the British Columbia coastline and into the northern Gulf, but they're also moving inland without a whole lot of moisture once they come up from that direction over the southeast. So right now, the main weather makers are sitting across the eastern Gulf. The stronger winds are on the south, and that's where most of the moisture is. As that wraps up northward, we see the winds start to diminish, and so too does the moisture. Across the Bristol Bay region, you see some stronger winds just south of Sand Point up to 50 knots. Those quickly diminish as they move into the west coast. And then on the back side of that, we get into the colder flow that also strengthens the winds. Those winds up to 30, even 80 knots there on the west and southern side, but that's also south of the Aleutians. Across the North Slope, north and easterly winds coming off of high pressure north of the Chukchi Sea. As we get across the Brooks Range at 3,000 feet, those winds pick up a little bit more from the east and northeast at 40 knots or so. Slower winds south of the Alaska Range, and the winds are not quite as strong across the west coast. West of the Bering Strait and south, the winds pick up once again over the open water. And guiding into low pressure there just south of the chain, Adak and Atka are seeing some stronger winds at this level, but right now only gales again at the surface. And light southeasterly winds are coming up through southeastern Alaska at 3,000 feet. So areas to watch for turbulence, of course, will be around southeast, especially across the outer coast below 5,000 feet. Over the Brooks Range, watch for some occasional chop, and below 5,000 feet across the western passes in the Alaska Range. Below 5,000 feet, you might run into some isolated moderate, and of course around the Pribilovs and the western Aleutian chain. That's a look at your aviation forecast. We'll be back with your marine weather here in just a few minutes. Stay tuned.
Weather balloons here at Fairbanks International Airport are released by the Weather Service twice a day, and the timing of those releases are such that they are coordinated with all the other releases around the world. And that data then, which provides a vertical profile of temperature and relative humidity and pressure in the atmosphere, is then integrated into the forecast models run by the Weather Service.
How can you forecast the temperatures when an inversion is present? It is a difficult puzzle. In Fairbanks, often the weather forecast says today, clear skies, high temperatures from 20 below to 10 above, coldest in the valley and mildest in the hills. A 30-degree range. This is not uncommon in the interior winter. It's a difficult puzzle to try to put very precise numbers. We need a broad range because within that shallow layer, you go from such cold temperatures to such warm temperatures. That's just the way it is here in the inhabited elevations of interior Alaska. Well, anything you want to forecast, including a temperature inversion, has to be studied. You have to learn how the inversion works in order to forecast its future behavior. And part of learning how it works involves gathering data. And every day out at the Fairbanks International Airport, a weather balloon is launched. On the end of the balloon is a thermometer, up it goes, and we get the vertical profile of temperature in the atmosphere. And that's real good data. You can see the inversion with that. Problem is, the weather balloon only goes up twice a day. And for forecasting, detecting and forecasting the jet stream, which operates on broad spatial and temporal scales, twice a day is for most purposes adequate. However, down here in this fine spatial scale right in urban Fairbanks, we need more than twice a day to really understand the inversion, especially its formation and its dissipation.
So the weather balloons that are released at Fairbanks International are timed with all those other global releases, and they are not actually at times which are very dynamically active here in Fairbanks, which is another reason that we're interested in doing this experiment with an aircraft and also additional weather balloon releases to sample some of those more dynamically active times of the day.
Basically, in preparing the sondes, you have to take the sonde out of the package, prepare the sensors, and then you'll fill up the weather balloon, then need to calibrate the instrument inside. So that's the most important part of balloon preparation. So when we're calibrating the instrument, we make sure that the temperature of the sensor is realistic with the temperature either of the room or outside, wherever the sonde is being calibrated, as well as pressure, making sure that's at our level, and also the relative humidity, that looks realistic. We use these weather balloons that when they're filled up with helium, they're approximately 6 feet wide. And by the time that they reach the top of the atmosphere where the balloon pops, they're about 20 feet wide. So they're huge. It's hard to even imagine. After we get clearance from the FAA, we'll go outside, take the radio sonde, attach it to the balloon, and then make sure there aren't any planes going by just in case, and let her go. And the computer inside actually picks up the signal automatically. It'll tell you exactly when the balloon was launched, and the data will come processing in from there. After we launch the balloon, I'll go back inside the building and to make sure that the data that's coming in on the computer looks realistic, making sure the pressure decreases with height, the relative humidities look realistic, and in my cases, looking at temperature inversion, that the temperature is increasing with height. Typically in the atmosphere, we see temperature decreasing with height, but in these special cases, that's what I'm looking for. And then I can watch as the temperature progresses vertically into the atmosphere, as that sensor's rising, and I can see where the top of the inversion layer is. So the National Weather Service currently launches weather balloons twice a day, but I wanted to launch weather balloons more frequently than that to see what was happening between those launches. So I wanted to take a look at what's happening between that 4 p.m. launch and that 4 a.m. launch, and then what's happening between the 4 a.m. and the 4 p.m. So I launched these weather balloons every 2 to 3 hours to gain a better temporal resolution of what's going on in the atmosphere.
Our research asked the question, what will surface-based temperature inversions look like in Alaska over the next 100 years? And the primary tool for studying future projections are global climate models. In fact, they're the only tool. But they're not perfect for answering our question because we're interested in information over a city landscape scale, which is a few miles, 5 miles, 10 miles. Global climate models provide information on a 100-mile scale. So we need to get that information from this coarse scale and downscale it to a higher resolution so it's useful for us. And the way we do that is we take climate information from the global climate model and we feed it into our regional model, which has a domain over Alaska at a resolution of, say, a few miles instead of hundreds of miles. And the large-scale climate comes from these global climate models, and then we run our simulation over Alaska. We have done regional downscaling simulations for 20 years in the 20th century, from 1979 to 1999. We've done 10 years from 2010 to 2019, and then from 2050 to 2059, and 2090 to 2099. So with the regional model, we've taken these 4 slices over time, fed by the global climate model. And what we find, first of all, in the 20th century simulation is that the regional model does a much better job of simulating the vertical surface-based temperature inversions over Fairbanks and the other cities in Alaska. And as we go through the 21st century, those 3 other slices, as the global climate warms, we find that the temperature inversions in the lowest layer don't really change in strength. The strength stays the same, but the whole profile gets warmer. So this study provides a first look at what would be happening to temperature inversions in the future. We need to ask other questions like, how will this frequency change? Will they occur as often? Will the season be much shorter? There's a variety of other questions we need to ask to develop a better picture for how temperature inversions will change in the future. And our first cut answer that we have suggests that we'll still have to worry about the same sort of air quality issues because in the near surface, the strength of the inversion will be about the same.
Ice continues to grow across the western coast. You can see more and more of that across the Chukchi Seacoast into Kotzebue Sound and Norton Sound. And like I said yesterday, all it's going to take is the wind to slow down just a little bit more. And we're going to see many areas here north of the Bering Strait increase their concentrations of ice. As we say every time, the white areas are concentrated ice above 80% and the light blue areas are less than 80% to 0. So more to come as we go through the winter season. Here's a look at southeast now. The winds coming out of the Lynn Canal out of the north around 20 knots with 4-foot seas there, 15 to 20 knot winds across the central and southern parts of the inner coast. And we're still watching for isolated thunderstorms tomorrow across the outer coast with winds from the south and east 25 to 30 and looking at 13 to 14-foot seas in most areas. The wind should diminish in all areas as we go along the outer coast on Friday. Variable directions there from about 10 to 15. We're still looking at a stronger northerly flow though from the Lynn Canal north and south all the way into Stevens Passage around 25 to 30 with 5 to 6-foot seas. A slightly slower speed across the Dixon Entrance and the Clarence Strait. Southeasterlies at 20 with a 4-foot sea on Friday in southeast. For the south central, look for light winds around 10 to 15 knots, 20 knots though outside of Prince William Sound from the north and east with a 9-foot sea, 6 to 7-foot seas across the western Gulf. Northwesterlies west of the Barrens with a 3-foot sea, 10 knots inside of Shelikof Strait and Cook Inlet tomorrow. For Friday, look for northerlies to continue, still around 10 to 15 there through south central, and northeasterlies inside of Prince William Sound with a 2-foot sea, 5 to 6-foot seas across the north and western Gulf, 20 knots east of Kodiak Island. From the north and east, that produces 8-foot seas. Southerlies from Castle Cape to Chignik tomorrow, 15 knots with a 5-foot sea. Southeasterlies coming into Sand Point and King Cove at 25 knots. Those winds continue across the Alaska Peninsula as you head into the Bering. and light easterlies inside of Bristol Bay with a 3-foot sea on Thursday. Northeasterlies pick up a little bit more there on Friday with a 4-foot sea expected, 6-foot seas down the coast, and northeasterlies from Kodiak Island all the way out towards Sandpoint and King Cove with a 10-foot sea there on a 20-knot wind for Friday afternoon. As we look at the Aleutians, look for stronger northerlies across Kiska to Attu at 40 knots, 30-knot winds there all the way from Kiska to Adak with a 15-foot sea. Look for west and southwesterlies across most of the central and eastern chain, a little bit more of a northwesterly flow from Atka to Adak with a 25-knot wind there on Thursday. As we get into Friday, winds in the west diminish to 20 knots, 10 to 11-foot seas there, and north and northwesterly winds start to take over for the central and eastern chain. Wind speeds come up in a few places to about 25 to 30 knots as we head into Friday, 8 to 11-foot seas in the Bering, and you're looking at 15-knot winds or 15-foot seas there from Atka to Nikolsky as we get into Friday afternoon. For the west coast, offshore winds from Mamaroneck all the way to St. Lawrence, looking at an easterly wind at 25 knots with a 7-foot sea, northeasterlies with 11-foot seas and a 20-knot wind around St. Matthew. The winds pick up even more for St. Paul and St. George with a 9-foot sea, 4-foot seas closer to the western coast. For Friday, a north and easterly wind across St. Lawrence Island could still produce some heavy freezing spray. Watch for that threat to continue across the northern and central Bering. 9-foot seas around St. Lawrence Island, 5-foot seas outside of the Kuskokwim. And look for a 9-foot sea on a northerly wind around the Pribilofs with a 25-knot wind. For the north coast, 15 to 20-knot winds around Point Barrow and eastward toward Kaktovik. That diminishes to about 10 knots. Stronger winds for the Chukchi and into Kotzebue Sound, 30 to 35 knots with 8 to 9-foot seas north of the Bering Strait. That comes up to 9 to 10-foot seas there on Friday. Winds still holding around 35 to 40 knots there. Strongest along the Chukchi Seacoast and 10 to 20 for the Beaufort Seacoast to Point Barrow on Friday. Recapping tonight's weather conditions are settling down, but we're still looking for patches of rain through southeast, occasional snow showers for higher terrain areas, as well as parts of the Copper River Basin and closer to the Talkeetnas. And look for that wave of low pressure to move from east to west across the interior. That could produce some snow there tomorrow. Low pressure will fan out across the Aleutians and diminish in its intensity as we go into Thursday afternoon. Gales across the west and heavy freezing spray warnings across the central and northern sections of the Bering. Occasional snow showers will be passing through the interior and south central with rainfall slowing down a little bit for southeast. Let's look at your forecast. Thanks for watching Alaska Weather.
These forecasts are to be used for planning purposes only. Call 1-800-WX-BRIEF for a formal pre-flight briefing. Always file a flight plan before you go flying. The U.S. Coast Guard Auxiliary urges you to leave a float plan with a friend or the harbor master before you go boating. Alaska Weather is made possible by the following sponsors.
The National Weather Service.
If subsistence hunting, trapping, and fishing are important to you, please consider applying for one of the open seats on your Federal Subsistence Regional Advisory Council. These seats will be filled by rural Alaskans who are knowledgeable about fish and wildlife subsistence in their region. Apply by Friday, January 29th, 2016. Information at 1-800-478-1456 or email subsistence@fws.gov.